name is Jarom, and I'm a long jumper for Lindenwood University, and my PR is 7 meters 11 centimeters, or about 23 feet 6 inches. So I started doing track in 7th grade, and I really enjoyed it. Had a lot of good buddies. Went to high school and kept on doing it to stay in shape for football. But as I got better my sophomore and junior year, I found a real love for the sport. I was a sprinter primarily in the 100, 200, 400, and 4x4. And I did a little bit of jumping early in my career, but then my knees started to hurt and I decided not to continue jumping in high school. Went to Culver Stockton my first year of track. Had a buddy there who was a really good long jumper, and I thought I'd play around and try it again. And turns out I'm really good at it. I hit a 23 and I transferred to Lindenwood. So my recruitment process from high school to college was a little bit rocky. I got started pretty late, so a lot of the colleges already had full rosters or very little to give in scholarship. Culver Stockton was one of my later options, and they had enough money to give me for me to go there, and I was pretty happy my first year. After I hit that really good mark in long jump, I wanted to explore my options for the schools that I was originally looking at, and Lindenwood was one of those. So I decided to contact the multi-as coach here, Coach Barnes, and filled out my NCAA application, got in the transfer portal, and it was a pretty smooth road after that. So in my experience, you really need to be very, very proactive about your recruiting process. You have to be the one emailing the coaches, filling out the recruitment questionnaires, contacting whoever you can in the organization or department, because unless you're one of the top athletes nationally in the nation coming out of high school, a coach is not going to come to you, and that goes for all sports. And then as far as athletically what coaches are looking for, you don't always have to be the best athlete. You just need to have a certain level of coordination, drive to be good at your sport, and I mean, decent stats wouldn't hurt, but I think character, determination, and athletic ability says more about an athlete than their actual stats do. So the transition from becoming a sprinter to a jumper wasn't so hard, because to be good at jumping, first you have to be really good at sprinting. I think the most difficult part for me was getting the coordination down to be able to jump well, I suppose. Like, there's so many aspects to long jump, even though it seems simple. You have to hit the penultimate right, you have to hit the takeoff right, you have to have half decent air mechanics and half decent landing if you're not one of the best to hit a good mark, and all those things are things I've been working on for the past 5 years now. Sprinting definitely helped me become a better jumper. You really have to have a lot of speed coming off that long jump board. A lot of the best jumpers in history, Carl Lewis, Jeffrey Henderson, first and foremost, they were sprinters. Carl Lewis had the 100-meter world record at one point. Jeff Henderson runs a 9.9. So these are really fast guys, and that speed carries them to the end of the pit, and that's why they're successful in their sport, and that's why I continue to work on sprinting. So in my experience, the life of a college track athlete has been pretty nice. There's a lot of time that goes into practice, weightlifting, academics especially, and regulation-wise, the rules differ quite a bit from NCAA to NAIA, and even quite a bit from the division that you're in within NCAA, like D1, D2, D3. From what I've read and what I've heard from friends, is D1 is a lot more rigorous. They require a lot more like volunteer hours, academic requirements, and stuff along those lines. Being a D2 athlete, you have a little bit more freedom, and it continues to go down to D3 in that way. As far as NAIA, I originally was an NAIA athlete with Culver Stockton. Their rules and regulations are a lot more lax than NCAA. That being said, they have very, very similar academic standards. And depending on where you go, there's not much difference between the two organizations. A lot of NAIA schools have just as good of athletes as NCAA Division I schools have, so it really just depends on what you choose. Academically, I've been not lucky, but I guess I've had to change a lot from my old high school ways. Wasn't the most responsible kid, struggled to turn in homework, didn't study for tests, and that really had to change for me to be successful in college. I went from a 2.9 GPA in high school to a 3.6, and in order to do that, I really just had to study for tests and stay on top of homework, and that is a huge part about being a successful athlete in college. I know people who have dropped below the minimum GPA requirement and were no longer able to compete nor practice with the team, and they lost their scholarship. So to be able to succeed in college as a track athlete, you really need to be determined, have a rigorous schedule, and just stay on top of your stuff, communicate with your professors, and be as responsible as you can. I know I'm making it sound really stressful to be a college athlete, but it has definitely been worth it. I can't imagine life in college without being an athlete with any sport. The connections that you build on a team really grows your social circle, and it gives you a lot more options, I guess, outside of track and school for people to hang out with, and it really helps you your freshman year going into a whole new environment, not knowing where stuff is on campus, struggling to find classes, and building a new friend group kind of expedites all those things. I think if I wasn't an athlete in college, I would have struggled a lot more in school, not only with building a good social circle, but also academically. I just wouldn't really know what to do with myself. So at the beginning of my track career at Culver Stockton, I obviously started out as a sprinter and decided to get back into jumping. Something that I didn't really focus on, which I definitely should have looking back on it now, is rehab, keeping up with my body's health, doing all the little exercises that I needed to do to keep my ankles healthy, hips and whatnot, all the things that are a part of sprinting and jumping. And what ended up happening was in 2019 or early 2020, I tore my deltoid ligament on my left ankle. It was so bad to the point where it was swollen to about the size of a softball for a good month, and I didn't do any therapy on it. Went all summer with pretty much nothing, just ignoring it, letting it get better on its own, which was a huge mistake, because when you have an injury, you really have to be proactive. You have to get therapy, you have to see your athletic trainers, you need to do more exercises than you've done in the past to be able to come back stronger, and that's something that I neglected. So fast forward a year, I'm competing for Lindenwood and I'm jumping on that same leg, and I re-aggravate it halfway through the indoor season, and it definitely affected me mentally, because I had just gotten over the hurdle of getting comfortable on it. I still felt it here and there, but I was finally jumping to where I was again, or where I was in 2020, and then I re-aggravated it. And because of that, I decided to switch jump legs and begin jumping my right leg. And thank God I was able to do that with very little issue. I was able to transition within about 2 weeks and hitting a new PR even. I had a few ankle injuries during that transition, I guess, mostly because I had never jumped on that leg, so a lot of the impact was unknown to that part of my body. But again, I didn't really keep up with training. I hadn't learned my lesson, and well, third time's a charm. I partially tore the exact same ligament on the new leg. And that is when I learned that unless I'm proactive about my well-being and I do the exercises that I have to do to keep myself healthy, then I'm just going to keep on getting injured. I'm going to keep losing time, and I'm going to graduate not doing what I wanted to do in college. So it took a long time to get over this injury, not just physically, but mentally. I'd say about a week after it happened, I immediately started therapy, working on it pretty hard. really good athletic trainers that helped me through the process. I had about a month off for winter break, and I came back. During that whole month, I was doing band exercises, mobility, all these things that I should have done in 2020 to keep my left ankle healthy. I was now doing them on my right ankle. And I came back in January, significantly better than where I ever was in my left ankle, and continued to work through that whole month without competing and practicing limited, very reserved practices, I guess. And within 2 to 3 months, I was back at 100%, now more confident than ever on this ankle. I had to push through a lot of mental hurdles during that time, really taking it lightly in practice and almost building up from scratch. And because of that, I am now at about 100% and competing to where I was 2 years ago. And it's all because I flipped a switch in my mind and decided to take care of my body. This is my bread and butter right here. Doing long jump for pretty consistently about 4 years now. I think I've developed quite a good knowledge about the event and how to be successful in it. So I'm gonna go through 4 steps, I guess, to being a good long jumper, or maybe 4 of the most important things. First and foremost is sprinting. You need to be a really good sprinter, or at least a technically sound sprinter, to be good at long jump. And that's my number 1 on the list, because you have 30 meters to run to build up that speed before you hit the board. And that speed is what carries you in this event, not the jump. It is all in the sprinting. The second most important thing about long jump is the penultimate. Now, a lot of you probably haven't heard of the word penultimate unless you're already a, pretty developed long jumper, or you've had a good coach. Penultimate refers to the second or third to last step before the jump, before the takeoff. And a lot of coaches or YouTube videos will tell you that you need to dip into the penultimate, lower your hips, and really load into the jump. That can be very misleading, because when you do the penultimate, you don't want to really lower into it, because then when you plant the foot for takeoff, you're going to be at too low of a position, and it can be hard to get yourself out of that for the jump. So what a lot of coaches mean when they say you need to dip into your penultimate, it's just dropping your hips a tiny bit, hitting that step hard so you're lifting into the takeoff, and then you hit the plant and you go on to the jump. You don't want to be going down into the takeoff. You want to be lifting into the takeoff, and it helps a lot with increasing your distance and carrying that speed through the board. The third most important thing about long jump is the takeoff. You want to plant that foot directly under the hips, maybe a tiny bit in front, but you don't want to do it too much, otherwise you'll lose all that momentum from the sprint on the takeoff. If you hit it too far in front of your hips, it's comparable to hitting the brakes on a car. You're gonna jam that foot into the ground, it's gonna hurt, and it's gonna slow you down a lot, and it's gonna take half a foot off of your jump, depending on how bad it is. But you just want to make sure that you get that foot out, pull it back and under your hips as much as possible, and it'll make the jump a lot smoother, it'll reduce future injuries, and it'll increase your length. Fourth most important thing is air mechanics and landing. The biggest thing with the air mechanics is just as soon as you hit that takeoff, drive the knee super hard, and whatever you do in the air, it's up to you. It's very different for everybody. The landing is also pretty different. A lot, some people land on their side, some people land on their feet. You typically don't want to land on your feet unless you're a crazy long jumper like Carl Lewis, who did that all the time. But when you land on your feet, you lose a lot of that space that you could get compared to landing on your butt. For instance, say you're doing a broad jump. If you're jumping forward and landing on your feet compared to your butt, then the amount of distance from your butt to the ground when you land on your feet is pretty much equivalent to the amount of distance you would have if you had landed on your butt horizontally, if that makes sense. So the biggest thing with the landing that I can say in my experience is getting your feet out, reaching towards your feet like you're doing a toe touch, I guess, or like a hamstring stretch, and then pulling your heels back towards your butt as you hit the sand to kind of pull yourself forwards. It'll gain you a couple more centimeters maybe, depending on how much momentum you kept into the jump. Otherwise, you're just gonna land on your butt. It's something that takes a lot of practice. All of these things are pretty interchangeable, other than the last one. And yeah, it's key things to being a long jumper. Some advice I wish I had as a track athlete in high school is watch the best. I keep mentioning Carl Lewis because I've watched his slow motion record jumps about 1,000 times. And the best thing that you can do as an athlete is learn from the people that are better than you, because it'll only make you better, and you try and mimic the things that they do as best as possible. Now, this is where coaching becomes a big part in an athlete's development, is preventing certain things from messing you up. So there's some things that Carl Lewis does that I will never be able to do, or that work for him but won't work for me, because different body types, different speed and development in the sport and whatnot. So definitely learn from other athletes, whatever sport you're in, and try and mimic and develop those skills, and just keep being persistent. And persistence is a huge thing in track specifically, because a lot of the things that we do don't come immediately. So you just need to be patient, keep pushing, stay determined, and eventually it will come. But it just takes time, so don't give up.